Yeah, so here we are on Prince Edward Island. We're going to look at a couple of rivers out here. On the east side, there's the Marie River. It would be used as kind of a control for what we're going to see on the west side. The Marie River is well buffered. Then we're going to move over towards the Wilmot River and the Dunk River. Wilmot River is the one to the north there on the top side, and then the Dunk River is down below it. We'll do the Dunk River first. Here we are. It says so right there, May 20th, 2020. Now we're just traveling from the east portion of the northeast portion of the Dunk River, and we're traveling along the river towards the west, or the southwest. And the southwest end of it, it dumps into the harbor, or into the bay, close to Bedeck Bay, I guess it is, close to Summerside. Now this is where you can see the potato fields. They come right up next to the Dunk River. There's a 45-foot buffer there. It could likely be a little bit bigger buffer. Sometimes when they're farming, they farm it quite well, and they do what you'd call as contoured plowing, where the rill lines will go in parallel to the river. And that would keep the any sort of runoff or any sort of storm material from coming into the river. But here you can see what happens when the storm material and the runoff and sediment gets overwhelming the buffer areas. So farther on down the river, and on the way down the river, you can see that it's all farmed in as close as they can get. There's a couple of riparian areas that you can't really farm on. That would be just right there. But for the most part, you can farm it right to the river bank, and they back up 25 meters, or sorry, 45 feet, and start farming there. Often they'll use the 45-foot buffer as a nice little trail to follow the edge of the field. Don't know, well, does that defeat the buffer? Who knows? So I'll let you just carry on. You'll see some of these ditches like this that are coming right off the field and into the river, and that would allow a lot of sediment into the river. Now, as we were right here on that portion of the river, it didn't look very good the day we were there. There was a bunch of poor little fish flying that were not flying; they were swimming sideways, which isn't too good for them. Here we are, we're coming down towards into the salt marsh area. This is tidal water down here where it gets close to Bedeck Bay and the Trans-Canada Highway. And then here we are, we're getting widened out, and it's going to be heading out into the Bedeck Bay there. You can see the channel is a darker spot, and it widens out as you get closer to the Northumberland Strait. Very, very pretty. Anyhow, can't complain about the scenery on PEI. Going to move over to the Wilmot River now. We moved up here on June 9th. We did this. And the Wilmot River has a little bit more of a riparian area around it, so it doesn't get quite as affected in the eastern reaches of the river as the Dunk River was affected by the farming practices. And the Wilmot River looks a little bit healthier than the Dunk River. Again, we're starting towards the east end of the river, the northeast end of the river, and working towards the southwest, where it'll go into Bedeck Bay. And we'll come back to it on a less ideal day. It had rained just a little bit before we were here. But when you get some of these big rainstorms, then you'll get a lot of sediment that comes off the field and gets into the river and turns it all red. So they like to call that, around there, the locals, they call that when the river starts bleeding. But again, you see that there isn't much distance between the cultivated land and the river itself. And here you can see where the trail along the side of the river is into the buffer zone. So is that the way it should be? I don't know. Now I'll take a closer look as we pass over this bridge here. We'll take a closer look right down to the water. When we were standing on the top of the bridge, you see our cars to the right there. When we were standing on top of the bridge, we could look down in the water and saw a bunch of fish down there, a bunch of trout. Can't really see them in the video, but they were all different sizes, so that says something good about the health of the river itself, that they're able to be breeding different years, so the different sized fish are in there. Then up, and again we're on our way towards the southwest, heading down the river. Now in the history of both these rivers, they both had dams on them. They both had, like the Dunk River, the pond on the Dunk River there at Scales Pond was originally a power plant, and it provided power for about 500 houses in the area. Then, I don't know when it was, but it was sold to Maritime Electric, and Maritime Electric used it until they didn't need it anymore. And now it's like a public park in there. Well, not really public, it's a private park. It's the International Children's Society thing. And there's the pond on the Wilmot River, and that pond, there was a mill on that pond, a lumber mill. Don't really know the history of it. Now all the red fields that you see, most of the red fields that you see they're potato fields that haven't sprouted yet. And then you see the fields that are green beside them there. Now they'd be a rotation crop, or some of them are hay fields. But again, the river is pretty close to the crops. And here we're coming onto the pond. From that, there was a dam here, and this would have been where the lumber mill was. It was powered by the water. Now we're getting down farther down the river. We're getting closer to where it dumps out into the bay. And we aren't into the tidal water yet, but we're getting close. Down here where you see this browner type stuff next to the river, that's salt marshes, so the tide will come up that high on a special high tide. And there we are out into Bedeck Bay again. So both of these rivers dump into this bay. And then out there is oyster grounds. They do a bunch of oyster fishing out towards there. And that's Summerside, or part of the town of Summerside there. And the Trans-Canada Highway where it crosses the river. Now that's pretty well all we're going to see about the Wilmot River today. Very pretty country. Now we're going to go and we'll transition over and take a look at the Marie River, which we did that on May 24th, just a couple of days after we did the Dunk River. Now you can see this river has got a very large riparian area that is, you and I would call it a swamp, and you can't get into there to do much farming. They are clearing some of it these days, getting closer to the river, but for the most part the river is well protected, and it's got perhaps a half mile or a quarter mile at least of riparian area and swamp on each side of the river. So when there is a large storm and there's no effect on this river, it'll be just as crystal clear after a large storm as it is today. And there's lots of beaver ponds and there's lots of swamps along the way. The river is just full of life. There's all sorts of birds nesting here, and we'll see in a few minutes here, they'll see some geese out on the water, and there's little baby geese with them, and very pretty. Now we're traveling down towards the north here along the Murray River, and this is going towards the St. Peter's Bay, where it dumps into the St. Peter's Bay. See, again, you can see that it's a little bit more bank to the river, so there's tougher to get into it and clear it and farm it. So there's lots and lots of room for any sort of runoff to get absorbed before it's makes the river red. And here's a flock of geese. If you look close, you'll see some little baby geese there somewhere, perhaps. Maybe not. So this area is farther up the river, upstream from where we were. And we're traveling towards the northeast along the river from farther up. And you just see beaver dam after beaver dam after beaver dam. And that's a very healthy river system in there. And that's about the closest field to the river in the north end. And there's just one field. In the south end. And there's a bit of a panorama there. Now we're down closer to the outflow of the river into the St. Peter's Bay. It's going south there. We're going to turn around and start traveling north along the river again. And there's about as close as a field that gets to the river in the north end of the river. And there's just that one field that gets close in the north end of the river. And here we're going to cross highway number 2 that just to the west of here is Morel, and it travels off to the east to St. Peter's and Surrey. And we took a walk down to the river bank under the bridge there, and you can just look down. There's lots of fish that are in the river. It's a pretty nice river. And up ahead is where it dumps into the St. Peter's Bay. So this would be tidal water here, but the banks are steeper, so it doesn't have a big tidal area. On the Wilmot River, you notice there was a pretty wide tidal area of swamp marsh. There's the old railway bridge and the Confederation Trail. And that's pretty well it for the Wilmot River. There's one of the most photographed spots on the planet right there. Anyhow, that's about all there is for today. So we'll come back at it on a rainier day.